A day after taking a lot of heat for the optics of the baseball game while Brussels burned, President Obama took a more serious tone in Argentina. Watch. Well, maybe not. But he really thinks he has a handle on terror. Listen.
This is my #1 priority. I've got a lot of things on my plate. But my top priority is to defeat ISIL and to eliminate the scourge of this barbaric terrorism that's been taking place around the world. Groups like ISIL can't destroy us. They can't defeat us. They don't produce anything. They're not an existential threat to us. It is very important for us to not respond with fear.
Leading from behind the third base dugout and leading your dance partner in the tango aren't really leading the war on terror, Mr. President. I don't think so, and neither does Dr. Krauthammer.
What he said in Argentina, this is a top priority, everybody understands that's a farce. He doesn't believe a word of it. He says it by rote because he knows he's supposed to say it. But he has said in interviews, he has said it to his staff, as reported in The Atlantic, more people die in falls in their bathtubs than die in terrorism.
He also said climate change was more important than ISIS.
Everything is more important than ISIS. He thinks it is the background noise of our time.
Okay, Dan, a couple of big things here. The optics, #1, and the intel failures. Which one do you want to take first?
The optics, I would say the baseball game is totally predictable, and it's in keeping with how he has chosen to respond to terror attacks. Remember, it was James Comey of the FBI who called the San Bernardino a terror attack. The president was not going to do that. And then when finally the FBI said, oh, no, we're doing that, then the president changed his tune and then makes a little stopover on his way to his vacation in Hawaii to see the victims on the way there. Otherwise, the San Bernardino attacks have been totally written off and forgotten by the administration. So I think that his response is absolutely typical and in a pattern that we've seen from him before. I would also say that the enemy is adapting. And I know that the president doesn't want to change course right now, but if the enemy is adapting, doesn't that mean that we should too? I would say yes. Third thing I would say is that it's just a very different viewpoint. So President Obama has long viewed terrorism as more of a law enforcement matter and not as terrorism. It is a different approach to fighting terrorism, but I have to say that if you look at that list that I mentioned yesterday in the Wall Street Journal of all the attacks that happen day after day against innocent civilians in the Western world, and not just the Western world, but innocent Muslims being targeted by these terrorists as well, that taking the fight to the enemy is a much better alternative to me than leading from behind.
All right. Casey, you listen to President Obama there and you're saying he's kind of circling the airport here.
Yeah, he wasn't even like focused or on point. I mean, I really enjoyed the latest episode of Dancing with the POTUS. That was particularly charming. But I mean, you know, Europe is burning. We're under repetitive attacks with now saying that 400 other trained fighters are coming in to wage jihad across Europe. Hey, let's get some focus here. But he's dancing. He's got his head in the clouds, the cumulus clouds, because he's worried about climate change. This isn't his focus. This isn't something that he actually thinks is a pressing concern. Because if he did, his actions would speak louder than his hollow words.
Mr. Juan, rebuttal.
Well, I don't understand what's being said at this table because, to me, we have hardened targets in this country. We have people on the ground even at this moment, as the president committed, he's trying to withdraw people. We put more people on the ground to fight ISIS than any of the European countries. Our security apparatus is far superior. In fact, today, what you saw in Europe was the foreign minister, the security minister, interior minister in Brussels saying, we'll resign, because they're embarrassed. They knew they should have done a better job. The Americans are doing a great job. San Bernardino, who's forgotten that? We're fighting Apple over access to the phone to try to find out more about the people who perpetrated that harm.
Let me ask you a question. Juan. President Obama says he doesn't want to keep Gitmo open because it'll tick off the terrorists. He doesn't want to say Islamic terrorism because it'll tick off the terrorists. These terrorists, now they're surrounded by, Belgium is surrounded by France and Germany, two countries that have sent a lot of troops into the fight against terror.
Not as much as we have.
But none from Belgium. Hold on.
Right.
But none from Belgium.
Correct.
And guess who gets blown to bits 2 days ago.
Well, I'm saying they have a real problem in that neighborhood, and that, don't forget, those are the
my
same people
point
who
is, it doesn't really
perpetrated the
matter
attack
what you
in
say
Paris.
or what
Hold
you
on.
do.
They
want to kill people.
Well, yeah, they certainly do. Nobody's denying that. But here's the thing. In the middle of the darkest night, do I want somebody leading me who's panicky, fear-mongering, reacting out of threat, or do I want a steady, commanding presence like President Obama?
Is that the only two options?
I mean, maybe he's like steady on the dance floor. It sounds like the only problem Juan has with what the president did is he didn't do the foxtrot or something like that. Juan, the guy's literally dancing in the dark while people are dying in the street.
Oh, yes, I know.
Remember,
you
President
can't even
Bush
leave the studio, Jesse.
gave up golf during the war on terror. It looks like President Obama's just given up. Let's remember some of the other images the president's given us. Fist bumping after and golfing after the beheading.
Oh my God.
Remember bowing to the Saudi king or flying off to Vegas fundraisers. The guy does not get it. He doesn't want to get it.
This is bipartisan
and to say that
mockery.
Trump,
Remember when President Bush
Trump
said President
is
Bush
encouraging
after
terrorism?
No, hang on, Jesse.
How do you
after
think
9/11,
ISIS looks at
after
this?
9/11, what did President Bush say?
Tango. You think that instills
President
fear
Bush
in
said
ISIS?
after 9/11, Americans, we need to get back to normal. We need to go shopping. We need to go about our business. We should not let the terrorists dictate the way we lead America.
You can walk and chew gum at the same time.
But
Obama's not doing either.
Democrats mocked President Bush, and now you're using the same thing to mock President Obama.
Prosecuting the war.
Juan, you think, though,
I see.
You think that the president's like soft-pedaling rhetoric, the smoother, cooler, softer approach is actually taking a dent out of jihad, and it is not.
There is no softer, easier approach. We have so much money, personnel, and time invested in fighting terrorism.
And by the way, why are you so afraid of words that you won't say radical Islamic terror?
I say radical. I think the president. I'll tell you why, and I've said it here before. Open up the eyes and ears, Kimberly. The reality is we need our allies in the Muslim world on our side. If we say we are perpetrating a war on Muslims,
we're not saying that,
that is trouble.
We're not
saying
saying
war on terror. He won't even say war on terror. Dana, let's talk about this. The other topic that we highlighted there was, he's against saying that. The intel failures. That was the former ambassador to Denmark, U.S. ambassador to Denmark, saying massive intel failures going on.
Which is kind of, it is hard to believe that 15 years after 9/11 that we still have this big of a problem. We've mentioned before that it's been every NATO meeting I ever had the opportunity and the privilege to attend. One of the big issues on the table was how the European countries were not meeting their obligation to NATO to spend at least 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. Belgium is at about 1%. Not only that, they've known about this neighborhood for years. Right. They were basically providing, I think, that the negligence by the Belgian officials was allowing the terrorists to plot and plan in a safe haven within Brussels.
100%.
And that was what we were supposed to be able to disrupt 15 years ago. And their laws, like where the things about breaking down intel and law enforcement to be able to talk to each other, they haven't even done the basics. They can't even learn from our terrible mistake. That we rectified over 15 years. We are willing to deal with it.
And you know what? The
so that the feds and local talk.
The Turkish government told them that the guy was a terrorist, but they didn't react.
And also, they lowered the alert level today. I mean, this attack was supposed to be perpetrated on Monday. You'd think they would at least wait until the Easter Monday that they celebrate.
Still with potential suspects at large. And keep in mind, they had like a huge heads up after the horrible tragedy and devastation that happened in Paris, okay? They knew these guys came from that area. They knew it was a safe haven. Therefore, they are aiders and abettors to jihad and terror because they stood by, they allowed it to proliferate, they gave them a safe haven, and look what happened.
That's a good point.
And you have, I think, one of the most tolerant countries in the entire European continent is Belgium. So it's, I don't think being more tolerant helps.
Also, and how much time do they spend going after American companies? For example, they spent years going after Google so that they could erase any sort of history on the internet as if that were actually possible. Try to bring Google to its knees in this, that you have a right to be forgotten. That's what they spent all of their time going after instead of
You know what I find so, they're always condescending to us as Americans about race. The Europeans, they know so much more. They're so much better. But you look at how they have handled their situation, where they have allowed their Muslim community to be ghettoized, where you have that 40% unemployment, terrible situation. this comes from people who were condescending to us about our racial issues.
But let's not get too tied up in blaming the Europeans for what happened. I think the onus really does lay with the terrorists.
Absolutely.
And we need, again, I want to highlight this one more time. And Brussels is the country that didn't send troops into the fight, into Africa, into the Middle East, but other countries have. So pussyfooting around these terrorists about not trying to offend them is a losing game.
But as long as you tell them that they're weak.
That's pussyfoot. You can say that.
Now you just said it twice. Don't put me on camera. Don't put me on camera.
All right, maybe I said something wrong. All right, I'll find out later.